Paul Newman was famous for his blue eyes in movies, but at home he was a completely different person. Now his daughter is telling the truth about what happened behind closed doors, the drinking that almost destroyed their family, the guilt he carried after his son's overdose, and the shocking confession he made on his deathbed. This story will change everything you thought you knew about Paul Newman. He was born on January 26, 1925 in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. His father, Arthur Newman, was Jewish and the son of Hungarian and Polish immigrants, and his mother, Teresa, was of Slovak descent. His parents owned a successful sporting goods store in Shaker Heights, an affluent suburb of Cleveland. Paul grew up in a comfortable home in Cleveland, but he still had to deal with racism. Shaker Heights was mostly Christian, and anti-Semitism was common at the time. In high school, Paul was an athlete and a good student, but he was turned down for membership in a fraternity because his father was Jewish. It was an event that stuck with him and probably shaped his later views on justice and equality. At the same time, Paul had a creative childhood. When he was only 7, he played Robin Hood in a school play. This small role inspired him, and he later joined the Cleveland Playhouse's children's theater program and acted in plays like St. George and the Dragon. He didn't see acting as a career. In 1943, after graduating from Shaker Heights High School, he went to Kent College to study economics, but World War II interrupted his studies. That same year, just before he turned 18, he joined the U.S. Navy with the goal of becoming a pilot. But doctors found that he was colorblind, which meant he couldn't fly, so he was reassigned as a radioman and rear gunner for torpedo bombers. In 1945, he was stationed in Hawaii getting ready for combat missions with his unit, which was assigned to the USS Bunker Hill, an aircraft carrier that was involved in the Battle of Okinawa. But just before deployment, their pilot got an ear infection which kept the crew from leaving. Kamikaze pilots attacked Bunker Hill, killing hundreds of sailors, including many from Paul's unit. If he hadn't had that ear infection, he probably would have been one of them. He finished his service and received medals, including the American Area Campaign Medal and the World War II Victory Medal. But more importantly, he left the Navy with a new perspective. His near-death experience changed the way he saw life. He had been given a second chance and he wasn't going to waste it. After the war, he went back to Kenyon College, but his interest in economics faded. There he joined the drama club and performed in plays like Charlie's Aunt, where he played a man dressed as a woman. He wrote and directed a satirical student musical that made fun of campus life and had a sharp sense of humor. Even though he struggled in school, theater gave him a purpose, and his expulsion from Ohio University wasn't the end of the road. It pushed him toward something better. After graduating in 1949, Newman's life took a different turn in 1950 when his father died, leaving him in charge of the family business, the Newman Stern sporting goods store in Cleveland. The store had been open since 1915 and was one of the biggest in the city, but Newman had no experience running a business. He felt trapped in a life he didn't want for 18 months and later admitted that he was running away from that world instead of embracing it. In 1951, he took a big step by leaving Cleveland and enrolling at the Yale School of Drama. At first, he planned to study directing because he still didn't think he had what it took to be an actor. But after a year at Yale, he moved to New York City to train under Lee Strasberg at the famous Actors Studio, where he learned method acting techniques that would shape his performances for the rest of his career. His first big break came in 1953 when he got a part in a Broadway play written by William Inn. He wanted the lead role of Hal Carter, but director Joshua Logan didn't think he was right for the part, so Newman was cast as Alan Seymour, a supporting character. It wasn't the part he had hoped for, but Picnic was a huge hit, running for 477 performances and getting great reviews. It also introduced him to Joanne Woodward, a young actress working as an understudy. Neither of them knew it at the time, but this meeting would lead to one of Hollywood's most famous marriages. Newman also worked as an understudy for the lead role, preparing himself for future leading roles. His film debut, The Silver Chalice, was a disaster and he played Basil, a Greek artisan. The role of making a silver chalice for the Last Supper should have been the turning point of Newman's career, but the movie was a mess. Critics called it dull and over the top, and Newman later said it was the worst movie made in the 1950s. He was so embarrassed that when the movie was set to air on TV in 1963, he put an ad in Variety apologizing for his performance and begging people not to watch it. That plan backfired though because his apology made people curious, and the show got more viewers than planned. Despite his disappointment, the movie still earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Male Newcomer, which showed that people saw his potential even in failure. Someone Up There Likes Me, which came out in 1956, almost went to James Dean. Dean had been cast as boxer Rocky Pashano, but after Dean's tragic car accident, the role was left open. Newman stepped in and made what could have been another boxing biopic into something unforgettable. He played Pashano as a man full of contradictions, tough but vulnerable, angry but charming. It was a performance that felt real and showed Hollywood that he was more than just a good-looking newcomer. The film's gritty style was ahead of its time, inspiring later classics like Raging Bull and Rocky. It also had a cast that was full of great actors. Pier Angeli played Graziano's wife and future stars, and Steve McQueen and Robert Loggia made their debuts in smaller roles. The movie won 2 Academy Awards for Best Cinematography and Best Art Direction, which added to its impact, and more importantly, it proved Newman had what it took to be a leading man. 2 years later, in 1958, he played the part that would make him famous, Brick Pollitt, a former athlete struggling with alcoholism and personal demons. He starred opposite Elizabeth Taylor, and their on-screen chemistry made every scene feel electric. The story explored Brick dealt with deep themes of family dysfunction, greed, and emotional repression. Newman played Brick with quiet intensity, showing pain beneath his cool exterior. Audiences and critics alike loved his performance, and he earned his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, proving once again that he was more than just a good-looking face. The movie was a huge hit, nominated for 6 Oscars but not winning any. It cemented Newman's status as one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Filming in color had an unexpected effect. It brought out his stunning blue eyes, making them one of the most talked about parts of his look. By the early 1960s, Newman was at the top of his acting game. In 1961, he starred in The Hustler as Fast Eddie Felson, a small-time pool hustler with big dreams. The movie was stylish, intense, and full of moral dilemmas. Newman brought arrogance and vulnerability to the character, making him one of the most memorable anti-heroes in film. The film won 9 Academy Awards, including 1 for Newman. The next movie was Hud, a Western drama released in 1963. Newman played Hud Bannon, a selfish rancher at odds with his father. Unlike typical Western heroes, Hud was reckless and morally flawed, making him a new type of character for Hollywood. The movie won 3 Academy Awards and earned Newman another nomination for Best Actor. As Luke Jackson, a rebellious prisoner who refuses to be broken by the system, he played by Newman in Cool Hand Luke in 1967. He gave another unforgettable performance that made the movie a cultural landmark. One line from the movie became famous: "What we've got here is failure to communicate." It was said by St. Martin's character, but it was forever linked to Newman. He was nominated for another Academy Award, adding to his growing legacy. Through it all, people couldn't stop talking about his blue eyes. They became as famous as his movies, but Newman never let his looks define him. He once joked that his tombstone should read, "Here lies Paul Newman, who died a failure because his eyes were blue." Paul Newman met Joanne Woodward in 1953 while they were both studying for the Broadway play Picnic. At the time, Newman was married to Jackie Witt and had 3 children, and Woodward was dating famous people like Gore Vidal and Marlon Brando. They hit it off right away, but at first it was just a friendship. Newman later admitted that he was drawn to her right away because she was modern and independent while she was more traditional. This made her even more interesting to him. Their relationship took a turn in 1957 when they got back together to co-star in The Long Hot Summer. By that time, Newman's marriage was over. Newman married Woodward in Las Vegas in 1958 after finalizing his divorce. They honeymooned in England before going back to start their life together. Despite the excitement of their new marriage, Newman felt guilty about how he handled his divorce and later admitted that he didn't explain it well to his children. Still, his love for Woodward was overwhelming. He once said that she gave birth to a sexual creature within him. This intensity shaped their marriage for the next 50 years. Being together for 50 years was no small feat, especially in Hollywood. Their love was deep, but their marriage wasn't always easy. Newman once said something about his commitment to Woodward that became famous: "I have steak at home, why should I go out for hamburger?" He meant to show his loyalty, but it also hinted at the temptations and the problems they had to deal with. One of those problems was his alcoholism, and another was the death of his son Scott from a drug overdose in 1978. The grief took a toll on the family, and Newman's daughter Melissa later said that her parents fought hard to stay together even when things were rough. To get away from the pressures of Hollywood, Newman and Woodward moved to Connecticut to have a quieter life for their 3 daughters. Newman often praised Woodward, calling her the reason he stayed grounded while they had their own children. They were always there for each other in their careers, and that balance became one of the strongest parts of their relationship. They worked together on 16 movies, starting with The Long Hot Summer in 1958 and including Rally Round the Flag, Paris Blues, and Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. One of their most famous projects together was Rachel, which Newman directed and starred Woodward in. The movie got great reviews and was nominated for several awards. Later they worked on The Effect of Gamma Ray on Man in the Moon, Marigold, and The Glass Menagerie, which were both directed by Newman. Their ability to bring out the best in each other made their movies stand out. Newman once said that their success came from a mix of lust, respect, and patience. Their love was real, but it wasn't perfect, and they were honest about the fact that marriage was hard work. Newman once said, "All the misdemeanors, betrayals, and difficulties have kind of evened themselves out over the years." Their daughters said that their parents had heated arguments but were just as passionate about making things right. Woodward reportedly didn't like Newman's famous hamburger comment because she thought it made their relationship sound too simple. Newman's drinking also put stress on their marriage at times, but therapy, persistence, and a deep understanding of each other helped them through. They also found joy in different hobbies, Newman in race car driving and Woodward in knitting, and they both loved giving back to the community. In 1969 he co-starred with Robert Redford in the western Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Newman played Butch Cassidy, an outlaw with a quick wit and a smooth voice. Redford played Sundance, the quieter but deadlier half of the duo. Their chemistry made the movie unforgettable. It wasn't just another Western, it was sharp, funny, and full of charm. Audiences loved it. It made over $100 million worldwide and was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. Newman's playful performance gave the film its heart, showing that even outlaws could be likable. 4 years later, he and Redford worked together again in 1973 for The Sting. This time they weren't outlaws in the Wild West. This time they were con artists in Chicago in the 1930s. Newman played Henry Gondorff, a seasoned hustler who knew all the tricks in the book. He made the character smooth, confident, and always in charge. The movie was a huge hit, making $156 million worldwide and winning the Academy Award for Best Picture. While Redford carried most of the plot, Newman's performance added depth and style. These 2 movies cemented his place in Hollywood and made his partnership with Redford one of the most famous in film history. By the 1980s, Newman had shown that he could play deeper, more complex roles without being mean. In 1981 he played Michael Gallagher, a man who was wrongly accused of murder by a reporter. The movie was more than just a thriller. It looked at the dangers of Newman played Gallagher as a man trying to clear his name. He brought a quiet intensity to the role that earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Then came the verdict in 1982. Newman played Frank Galvin, a failed lawyer looking for redemption. Galvin takes on a medical malpractice case, and for the first time in years he has a chance to prove himself. Newman made every moment of Galvin's struggle feel real. He showed Galvin's despair, determination, and slow return to self-respect. The movie earned 5 Academy Award nominations, including 1 for Newman. He didn't win, but his performance earned him another nomination. Newman had been nominated for 7 Oscars but had never won.
In 1986, the Academy gave him an honorary Oscar for his lifetime achievements, almost as if they thought he'd never win. But the very next year he did win. In The Color of Money 1986, he played Fast Eddie Felson again after 25 years had passed since he first played the role in The Hustler 1961. Eddie was older and wiser but still wanted one last chance at greatness, so he took a young pool player played by Tom Cruise under his wing. But this wasn't just a story about taking a young person under your wing, it was also about pride and ambition. Newman won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1987, which was long overdue for this role and everything else he had done for movies. Even as he got old, Newman never lost his touch. In 1994's Nobody's Fool, he played Sully Sullivan, a cranky but lovable handyman in a small town. Sully was a man full of regrets, but Newman gave him humor and warmth, making him one of the most relatable characters of his career. He was 69 years old at the time, but he was still doing some of his best work, which earned him another Academy Award nomination. His last live-action role, an Irish mob boss who was torn between fatherhood and loyalty to his family. The movie's main character, Rooney, was not a typical bad guy. Instead, he was a man torn between love and duty. Newman played him with quiet authority, making every word feel heavy with meaning. He was 77 years old when he earned his last Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. It was a fitting end to a career that had lasted more than 50 years. Paul Newman was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but his life was anything but perfect. He struggled with self-doubt, being a father, and drinking. His memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, showed a side of him that few people knew about, not even those closest to him. Newman never believed he was truly talented. He felt like an imposter, and he thought his looks had given him opportunities he didn't deserve. He described himself as anxious and full of doubt, always afraid that people would realize he wasn't as good as they thought. Even after starring in The Hustler in 1961 and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid in 1969, he still couldn't get rid of the feeling that he didn't belong. His childhood had planted these doubts deep in him. His mother treated him more like a trophy than a son, and his alcoholic father left him with wounds that would never fully heal. His second wife, Joanne Woodward, helped him find confidence. She saw something in him that she told him to be proud of his reputation as a sex icon, but that wasn't enough to stop his doubts. He always wondered if people liked him for his talent or just because of his looks. In his memoir, he made it clear that he wanted to tear down the perfect image people had built around him and let the world know who he really was. His problems weren't just personal. As a father, he felt like he had failed because he had 6 kids but was often impatient, inconsistent, and absent. The weight of this failure hit him hardest when his 28-year-old Scott died of a drug overdose. Newman felt terrible guilt over Scott's struggles and wondered if his own success had made things harder for Scott because he felt like he had to live up to a standard that was impossible. Scott's death changed Newman forever. Even after the tragedy, he found it hard to talk about his grief. His daughters later said that they didn't fully understand how much pain he was carrying because he never talked about it. Instead, he focused on action. In 1980, he started the Scott Newman Center to teach young people about drug abuse. It was his way of turning his loss into something meaningful, though it didn't take away the regret that would follow him for the rest of his life. Alcoholism was another battle he fought for years. Newman called himself a functioning drunk because he drank a lot while still working, but by the 1970s it was putting his marriage at risk. Woodward finally had enough and made a deal with him that he would give up hard liquor. He kept drinking beer and would sometimes finish a whole case at dinner. His drinking didn't just affect his personal life, it also affected some of his most famous roles. In The Verdict, released in 1982, he played an alcoholic lawyer looking for redemption. The role hit close to home for him, as many of the problems his character faced were similar to those he himself was having. Even earlier movies like Buffalo Bill and The Indians, released in 1976, showed his real-life relationship with alcohol. Despite all of this, Newman found a way to regain control, and it wasn't acting. It was racing. His journey began in 1969 when he was 43 years old and preparing for a movie about a veteran racer trying to win the Indianapolis 500. He wanted his performance to feel real, so he trained at Lime Rock Park in Connecticut. Newman was drawn to the world of real racing legends like Bobby Unser and Dan Gurney after filming was over. He bought a Dawson 510 and started practicing on his own. At first it was just a hobby, but in 1972 he competed in his first professional race. Most racers retire in their 40s, but Newman was just getting started. He approached racing with the same discipline he brought to acting. He didn't rely on his fame to open doors. He worked his way up from small competitions in the Sports Car Club of America, showing he was really good behind the wheel. Over time he became one of the best amateur racers in the country, and by the late 1970s he had won 7 SEGA titles. He wasn't just an actor who liked cars, he was a serious competitor. Then in 1979, when he was 54 years old, Newman did one of the most impressive things in endurance racing. He competed in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is one of the hardest races in the world, driving a Porsche 935 with professional racers Ralph Stock and Dick Barber. The car had over 700 horsepower, but the race was brutal, with heavy rain turning the track into a slippery battlefield. Many teams struggled to keep up, but Newman's team pushed through and finished second overall and first in their class. It was an amazing feat, especially for someone who started racing so late in life. Newman wasn't just a great driver, he also knew how to put together a winning team. In 1983 he teamed up with Carl Hose to form Newman Hose Racing, which quickly became one of the best teams in the history of Indy cars. Their first season was a success. Mario Andretti won the 1984 kart championship, showing that the team was a real contender. In 1993 they made history again by signing reigning Formula One champion Nigel Mansell. Mansell went on to win the IndyCar championship that same year, which was something no other driver had ever done in his rookie season in almost 30 years. Newman Hose Racing won 108 races and claimed even though his racing career took off, Newman never stopped acting. In 2006 he voiced Doc Hudson in Pixar's Cars, which was his last major film role. Doc was a retired race car with a legendary past, which was a perfect fit for Newman. The 1951 Hudson Hornet that inspired Doc was a legend in early NASCAR, and the role reflected Newman's own racing history. He loved working on the project not just because of the racing connection, but also because of Pixar's storytelling. The film became one of the biggest hits of the year, earning $462 million. Newman retired from acting in 2007, but his voice came back in Cars 3 2017 through archival recordings. By that time his health was getting worse and he spoke. He talked openly about getting older, saying that you start to lose your memory, your confidence and your invention, but he never lost his passion. Paul Newman was more than a Hollywood star, he was a man who turned his struggles into something greater. He died of lung cancer on September 26, 2008 at the age of 83. His wife Joanne Woodward was holding him as he took his last breath at home in Westport, Connecticut. His name will always be linked to classic movies like Cool and Luke and The Hustler, but his true legacy went beyond the screen. Unlike many actors, he never chased fame, he put family and purpose ahead of fame. Newman's marriage to Joanne Woodward lasted 50 years and was one of the few love stories in Hollywood. Together, they raised 3 daughters, Nelissa and Claire. Newman also had 3 children from his first marriage to Jacqueline Whitty. His life wasn't always easy. In 1978, his son Scott died of a drug overdose. The loss broke him and he wondered if he could have done more. Instead of wallowing in grief, he took action, starting the Scott Newman Center to help others fight substance abuse. He rarely talked about his pain, but his actions showed how much he cared. By 2007, Newman had retired from acting because his health, even though his body was weakening, his spirit stayed strong. His daughters have written about parts of who he really was. Melissa, one of his daughters, wrote in his memoir about how he struggled with his childhood shaped him in ways he rarely talked about. His father was distant and demanding, and his mother smothered him with affection to the point of making him uncomfortable. These early wounds left a mark, but Newman found a way to move on. Clee, another of his daughters, says that he was truly happy when he helped others. She now works with the Serious Fun Children's Network, a global community of camps for kids with serious illnesses. She often feels her father's presence when she visits, knowing that he is there. Newman's owned the food company he co-founded with author A.E. Hotner in 1982 was one of his greatest accomplishments. It all began with a simple Christmas gift. Newman made homemade salad dressing and gave bottles to his friends. They loved them so much that he decided to sell them. He and Hotner put up $20,000 to start the business, but Newman never meant to make money. Every penny of the profit would go to charity. The company grew to include salad dressing, spaghetti sauce, popcorn, frozen pizza, lemonade, and even wine. But it wasn't just about good food. Newman added his sense of humor to the brand by writing catchy slogans like "Find Food Since February." People loved the products, but they also loved the mission. By 2022, Newman's Own gave more than $600 million to charity. One of its biggest gifts was to Serious Fun Children's Network, which runs the camps that his daughter Clee now supports. The company also helped military families through the Fisher House Foundation and funded community projects in Kenya. Newman personally managed the donations until 2 years before he died. To make sure his mission would live on, he started the Newman's Own Foundation, which is still in operation today. His vision showed that business could make a difference. Couldn't just make money, it could change things.